I am thrilled today to be joined by my friend Abby McCloskey, who is a columnist with the Dallas Morning News and the host of the Beyond Talking Points podcast. I hope you subscribe to it. Abby is smart, she is insightful, and I'm really grateful that she is with us here today. Abby, welcome.
Wow, thanks, Steve. Glad to be here.
19 days left, 2 days ago in Texas, and you're in Texas. So I have to start with the Colin Allred Ted Cruz campaign and the debate and your impressions of it and where that stands. It looks like from outside of Texas, this is a very, very close race. Could Ted Cruz lose?
Seems unlikely that Ted Cruz would lose. Texas is still a dominant Republican state, but I like Colin Allred, and he's running a good race, so we'll see what happens in a few weeks.
What about like the extent to which that Ted Cruz from a value set, right, from a cultural perspective is, I'm
Yeah.
54, so I date myself a little bit, right? That this ethos of Texas, right? That you don't run away to Cancun during a crisis.
Gotcha.
You don't hide in the closet when the mob comes, from the insurrection, right? This is the state of James Earl Retter, the state of Audie Murphy. It's Texas.
It's the state of the Alamo. We just came back from the
Right.
Alamo, and it's so I came to Texas, Steve, a decade ago. I'm from Cleveland, did a stint in DC. And when I came to Texas, Perry was governor, and you and I worked on his second presidential campaign together. And what drew me here was really the conservative economic focus, that it's a place of opportunity because it's going to be a pretty light tax and regulatory environment. You can kind of become who you want to be in the state. And over the last 10 years, I think what's happened in Texas is really a bellwether for what's happened across the nation, is at the heart of Republican and conservative politics has moved from limited government, economics, opportunity focus, what really appealed to me, into more of a red meat culture wars, guns, abortion, cancel culture, you name it. That switch has been really off-putting to me. I think it's been off-putting to a lot of people. I think that's why you see a competitive race here with Allred and Cruz. Yeah, but it's the nature. Texas has changed, just like the country's changing, and the areas of focus are changing too.
What is the country changing into? I watched the debate between Harris and Trump, and I thought that Harris's reaction, um, when he talks about the Haitians are eating pets, was perfect in that it was human, shocked, bursts out laughing, the preposterousness of it. But when you unpack it, it is as vicious a racist lie as anything that came out of the mouth of a Joseph Goebbels or a Julius Streicher. It is a dehumanizing quote that takes Black people and casts them really as tribal savages let loose in this pristine white utopia, as described by Trump, where they're kidnapping and cooking and barbecuing the pets. What is that? I have said, right, that Trump is a fascist for years now because I evaluate what he says. I take it literally. I take it seriously. And I says, this is
Sure.
what a fascist says. But the modern conservative movement has wound up here, which is not a place I would have anticipated it winding up from the perch I sat in the Bush White House in 2005, but maybe I was very naive.
Things in that, Steve, and I do want to spend a moment on immigration here, but let me table it for a minute, because I think you go to the VP debate with Vance and Walz, and you say, you know what? for the most part, this kind of looks like not much in America has changed. Just kind of looks like a normal debate if these two guys are at the top of the ticket. And there's some strange things like the Haitian pets claim is not withdrawn or denied by Vance. He stands behind it. Vance didn't, he continued to perpetuate the lie that the election was stolen in 2020. So there were some strange things. On a whole, it seemed pretty normal. And so I think there's this desire among, I'll put it like the exhausted majority, most Americans, to say this is just a phase with what's going on with Trump at the top of the ticket. And, you know, beneath it, we're actually okay. I'm not convinced that that's true. I think that the VP debate was a glimmer of normalcy, but that a normalcy that's on the decline. You know, I follow a lot of the political science literature. We're the most polarized as a nation that we've been since the Civil War. I'm sure your viewers know that. Our views of the other party are not just that they're wrong on policy, it's that they're immoral. And in some cases, there's reason to say that's certainly the case. I think in many examples on both sides. But underneath that politics, we have a fracturing of a country of trust in things like media, schools, police, families are breaking down. And so there's just a deep fracturing, I think is the best word, from the top, the politics, all the way down, which makes this moment incredibly volatile and precarious. And it creates an environment where things like Haitians eating pets, which has, you know, I was a Senate staffer, right? We'd get letters about stuff like that all the time. And you'd go to Snopes.com and be like, nope, this is a conspiracy. We appreciate your concern. Thank you very much. But now we're in such an environment of distrust because of the fracturing of institutions at the very most local and upper levels, that things like that, just completely baseless lies, can somehow flourish, which is, it's pretty astounding. I think, you know, the thought was when we came into an environment with the internet and fact checkers, we have more information, more knowledge than we've ever had, and there is more confusion than there's ever been because it's really unclear. I think even for the earnest, honest person trying to figure out what's going on, to know where to look. Are all the big media companies in cahoots? Does this one random podcaster talk? Do they know what's going on? Kind of where's the truth and how do I find it? And I think in the midst of a lot of that confusion, it is a breeding ground for things like conspiracy theories and an attempt to kind of grasp onto control. But I want to talk about the immigration piece because that's a big deal here in Texas in particular. It was a big deal in the Bush White House. They tried to pass immigration reform.
I don't want to cut you off before we get into immigration, but let me frame the immigration debate that we had in the country and give you an opportunity to dispute my premise here, because I had a conviction about this, worked for John McCain, worked in the Bush White House, and was part of a wing of the Republican Party that was pro-immigration, that talked about the necessity of immigration and recognized what I would have argued was a basic reality, that we had some scores of millions of people in the country illegally. The number used to be 11 million. That was the agreed upon number. I think it's a much higher number now, but there's 11 million people that were in the country illegally. There seemed to be a consensus that they were in the country illegally because we tolerated illegal immigration with a wink and a nod as a society. And the deal that was proposed was essentially this: that you will pay a fine of some sort. You will be regularized in the United States, meaning you have a legal status. And then you will go to some place in a long line that I don't and have never understood why it's 23 years long, but The line is that long. And so you will go to the back of the 23-year line. And so after 23 years, you would be eligible to get a green card. And after 7 years, right, you would be eligible to take a citizenship test, right, 30 years from now. And the parameters of that compromise were, we're going to stop illegal immigration into the country with serious control of the border. You have to do that in the post 9/11 environment because we must know who's in the country. By the way, every other country in the world, including Mexico, insists on knowing who's inside of its borders. That you can stay, you can pay a fine, and that's the deal. That was the architecture of the immigration deal that an overwhelming majority of the country said it supported. Trump comes into a race. Down the escalator, the Mexicans are rapists and murderers. They're also per capita highest percentage of Medal of Honor recipients. But Trump does what he does. Biden is sworn in. Take it from there.
It's a pretty good recap, Steve, not going to lie. But right. Comprehensive immigration reform has always had three parts. And first is border security. And there's always been a time delay before the other two parts even click in until the border is made more secure. Can it ever be completely secure? Absolutely not. But I think something that gets overlooked in a lot of the debates now is that up until recently, most of our illegal border crossings came from visa entry exit points. It's not just the southern border. It's people who come legally and then overstay their visa, and we don't have any tracking mechanism to follow them. The second part is legal immigration, because the way to legally get into the country, if you're coming in from Mexico, is basically there is no way. We have quotas and how many people can come from where. The legal system is incredibly backed up. So that's the second part of reform, is how do we actually have a legal system that makes sense, where we can bring in the workers that companies need, whether it's low skilled or high skilled or in between. How can we have a legal system that benefits the American economy? And then the third is what to do with, and I still, it's upwards probably of 11 million, but I still like that number, is what do you do about the people here who are living in the shadows of our economy, who we have given a wink and a nod that they can stay here, who do end up living in mixed families that have maybe a child who's a citizen and another child who's a dreamer and a family member who's they're enmeshed with us. What do you do about that population? And the consensus was that there is a path to legal status. It doesn't have to be citizenship. It could be, doesn't have to be a green card. It could be just a new legal status. But what is a way that we can bring them in? Maybe there's a fine of back taxes, like all the taxes that the immigrants in general tend to pay taxes, but that there is a way that they are kind of fully with you and me in this country, as opposed to having this shadow status. So it's those three parts. What to do about border security, what to do about the legal system, what to do about the unauthorized immigrants already here. That was a substance of Reagan's immigration reform 40 years ago. Last time we had major immigration reform, that was a substance of Bush's proposal. That was a substance of the Gang of Eight proposal. That is what we actually need to fix the system. Okay. So there's a huge surge at our southern border after COVID. Why? Because all the borders of the world slammed shut during COVID. They open up, the US economy is roaring back faster than anywhere else. Where would you want to go, right? You want to come here. There's a huge surge. It's not necessarily related to Biden's policies as much as it would be related just to the reality of the pandemic and the pandemic ending. But it happened. And you have Harris basically saying the border secure, we don't have to worry about it. You have some type of, I think, border security denial that happens on the left, which has opened up the floodgates for Trump to own the issue, to be the border security guy. I think we saw Biden change the policy this summer and become more strict on the border and who can claim asylum. We're seeing Harris tack to the right on the issue. Like, I think Trump was right to make border security a focus. He is wrong. You can have a secure border without lying about immigrants, saying that they commit more crimes, which is absolutely false, saying that they're a drag on the debt. They actually tend to reduce the federal debt, saying that they take away jobs from the American worker, which rarely ever happens. You can have a secure border without the racist comments and these lies and it, wrapped around it. And that's for me what is disgusting about it. And the reality is he built part of the wall. He was president. We still had the illegal immigration surge. It takes more than just building a wall. It takes a comprehensive, secure system, but it also takes reforming our legal system. And I think, to me, the thing that would tear our country apart is his promise of mass deportations. And especially in a place like Texas, where it's majority minority, where whites are already the minority in Texas, that if you start having raids of communities with mixed citizenship status, largely targeting Hispanics, that will tear our country apart. And that terrifies me because, I'm a policy person. When you look at who's going to be president, everyone promises a bunch of things. You can't do a bunch of things because it takes Congress. It wouldn't take Congress to do those deportations, which is why I think it's particularly scary.
We're going to talk about what that looks like. Should Trump become president in a minute? But if he does, you use the word denialism. And I talked to so many people, and so many people who watch this will be voting for Harris. A great many of them do not like at all to be presented with any information, have a great intolerance for any information that challenges a worldview about the Democratic Party's denialism about two things. The first was the border. And so the Democratic Party's position wasn't that we have a crisis at the border because, and we're going to do whatever about it. It was to say everything is good at the border.
That's right.
And largely, whatever you wish to refer to it, corporate media, mainstream media, legacy media, largely that line was echoed, as was, this is the best version of Biden that we've ever seen. He's good to go. And both of these things completely fall apart in spectacular fashion. And here we are in this moment, and the political consequence of it is staggering. Because Trump, who is the most prolific liar by number of lies told in the history of American politics, is able to muddy up honesty as a core issue because of the gaslighting of the public by the Biden administration on these two issues. One is immigration, and one was on Biden's fitness at all.
Yeah. Let me reassure your fears, Steve, because the American public never fell for it. In polling, they continued to trust Republicans more on the border. Even during the Biden administration, when they're saying no problem, the polls showed Americans knew there was a problem, right? Hence the political gap that Democrats have needed to make up and why they're tacking to the right, because no one was fooled, okay? But I think what's really frustrating to me is that even when you recognize the challenge of border security, is that does not need to be accompanied by the lies and the muck that you talk about, that there aren't easy solutions for this, that Democrats are wrong to be like, oh, the border is secure, as they said a few years ago. Republicans are wrong to be like, you can just secure the border. I mean, that's really hard. You can talk about it all you want, but if you really want to do it, like that's tricky. And these issues are complicated, and they take complicated, thoughtful solutions that don't, people aren't triggered on each side talking about them.
I think, you said no one was fooled, yes, but many were unnecessarily antagonized on
Sure.
these issues. And what I mean by that is that, and I fall into this category. And I think it's a human psychology question. I always say that if I knew that I was going to spend a career running political campaigns, I would have majored in psychology as opposed to political science, right? But I use this example, right? Because I think it's vividly illustrative of the point. Is Joe Scarborough looks into the camera one morning and he says, a couple of weeks before the debate, this is the best version of Joe Biden there has ever been. He's smarter, he's more experienced, yada yada yada. And then he raises the ante. Scarborough goes, and if you say otherwise, I'm looking in the camera. F you. He goes, F you. So there is a percentage of the human population that gets deeply antagonized when they're told to accept something that they can obviously is not so, and then are yelled at by someone, right? About being, like, sit down and shut up. And we live in a defiant country. Maybe Texas is the epicenter of defiance, right? Like culturally as a state. So that doesn't work, right? So these issues have antagonized people because of the response to the obvious has been shut up and sit down. And here we are. And so let's talk about, and you are a small c conservative, a limited government conservative, a policy expert. So I've always made the argument that there's no big government like the one that tries to deport 10 million people and peers through your bedroom window. But let's talk about what it would look like to deport, let's call it 13 million people from the United States. Has anybody put a dollar cost on that?
There have been a lot of studies, actually, including official government ones and non-official kind of think tank or policy ones. Obviously, if you deport 10, 11, 12 million people, you suffer a huge economic contraction, right? Businesses struggle to find workers. This is not like a shuffle and all of a sudden there's a bunch of American workers ready to go to take those jobs. This is a huge economic contraction, okay? I think his ability to actually do that would be pretty limited. So my nightmare scenario is actually, it's a much smaller number, but the amount of social and cultural upheaval and economic impact limited to particular towns would be so disastrous and cause so many conspiracy theories, even floating up from that on all sides, that I think it would be absolutely devastating beyond the dollar amount to like what it does to our connection to each other.
You're answering the question through a prism of cost to the economy in a macro lens, and I'm gonna put a fence around this conversation. I want to get into it, right? It's just that. So I'm going to take him literally and seriously. What they've said is we're going to deport upwards of 15 million people. So, okay, you're going to do it. I want to talk about what that looks like. And I just wonder, right? It may be that no one has said as a plan, right, the dollar cost, right, logistically of deporting 15 million people is going to cost what?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You're saying the military personnel, the camps that need to be built, what is that? Again, I think.
Well, the U.S. military, as you know, right? I mean, are we going to detail the 101st Airborne to deportation camps? Right, because I thought the 101st Airborne was in a training cycle, right, that they were preparing for combat. Right. So So is it
Yeah.
what percentage of the military budget will be appropriated towards the deportation effort? What
Yeah.
submarines are we planning to cancel, for example, that are scheduled to be deployed in the Pacific? I mean, how many
Yeah.
law enforcement do you need to deport 15 million? Where will the camps be? Are we putting them on trains? Are they going on planes?
I think that's an important point, right? Because it's not the government cost of the Trail of Tears and the Cherokee Nation. It's not the government cost of Japanese internment. That's not why we look back at those episodes with horror. It's because of what was actually happening and how humans were treated. And again, even if you don't deport the full number, 10 million plus, which would be actually really hard because of course we don't even know where they are. This is part of the problem. They're not documented. But even a much smaller number, you're building camps. You can't just go, there's going to be the types we saw with the separation of kids and parents at the border. There's still 1,000 kids, by the way, who are not reconnected with their parents from the first Trump administration. It's camps, it's roundups, it's door to door to try to figure out citizenship status. It would be
What about checkpoints?
awful. What did you say?
Checkpoints on highways? Papers, please.
Sure. I mean, we saw glimmers of that. If you got pulled over with a traffic ticket, maybe we're going to check your immigration papers too. I think it would dial up the fear, the distrust, and it would be awful. Which is why, even though I'm an Anglican, I like the Pope's comments that neither party stands for life. Right? What would happen under Trump with immigration is horrifying. In the same way, I don't support, Harris's approach to abortion.
Let's role play. You be the
Would
border
love to.
patrol agent, right? Or the National Guardsman or the soldier on a highway at a checkpoint, right? And you're saying papers, please.
Yeah.
Citizenship check. And I say, go fuck yourself. Because
Mhm.
this would be my response,
It's not hard to imagine, Steve.
right? I don't have to show you that. That will
You're
be my
cuffed.
that will be my response. Like I would,
That's right.
as an American citizen, I will not present my papers on an American highway in the interior of the country to any federal official to prove my American citizenship. I just won't do it. Right. I will. So what happens then? Because I'm not sure that there's a statute out there that requires me to do so. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's not.
I mean, I think if you're defiant to an officer, it's the same thing that would always happen. Next thing you know, you're out of the car, you're being cuffed, you're talking back, you're a physically imposing person. Right. But again, that's what I'm saying. It's not like we automatically know who's here unauthorized. Like it would be so invasive to even including our citizens, to especially Hispanic citizens here, and militaristic. And, again, at the end of the day, if this plan, which I think is immorally horrifying, were successful, and all the millions are deported to places, by the way, most have lived here for over a decade, to places that they have no family, no connections to anymore. And we just close our eyes to that humanitarian crisis. And we're back here. If there's still no process in place for legal immigration, if there is still no security at visa entry exit points, if there is still no bipartisan system that doesn't flip-flop depending on who's in the White House and in Congress, the problem is not solved. It's not solved.
It's beyond that, though, right? I mean, because the conversation that we're having is predicated not on any type of fantasy, right, but on the explicit promise of the Republican nominee that I'm going to deport some scores of millions of people up to 15. And what I
The
said,
number one campaign promise. Yeah.
right, what I said is, fast forwarding, he said he's going to deploy the military to do it. So now we have a soldier, right? And it's a check. In the
Yeah.
interior, we want to see your ID. If I get pulled over on a state highway, I'm not going to be compliant with it, right? I will resist it because constitutionally, I don't have to prove my citizenship moving around the country. I'm going to resist it. So the next thing is you point out, you're going to be pulled out of your car by a soldier, restrained, and the people that are much more likely to happen to, right? Don't have our eye color,
That's right.
right? Don't have our complexion.
That's right. And that's why it's so devastating. That's why it's so devastating and so immoral. And I think to play devil's advocate with you, Steve, I think there are plenty of, I'm still in conservative circles, right? People who say it's just Trump. He says all sorts of things. He didn't do mass deportations the first time. He's just saying it to get into the office, and then so it's nothing to worry about. And so I think you're right to play forward the film and say, even if it doesn't happen to the scale that he says it does for all sorts of reasons, like cost and just the sheer exercise of it, it would be devastating. And it would be a stain on our common humanity and the citizens of the country. It's a wrong thing to do. And it doesn't solve the problem.
I was struck a week or so ago on The View, Joyce Behar.
You're watching a lot of TV,
Joyce
Schmidt.
Behar. I see the clips, right? And she said something that I thought was like really deeply true, right? She was like, I cannot imagine how any person could ever vote for Donald Trump, right? You just like I think that is as
Sure.
true a statement, right, as has been said on television, right? You could hold a gun to her head, you could waterboard her, she could not come up with, and it's not an indictment. I'm not. She cannot imagine a worldview where someone votes for Trump, given the craziness from the swaying of the music and everything in the last 48 hours. Take us inside a conversation with a cogent conservative who's voting for Trump, and explain as coherently as you can, right, to that person what it is about the Democratic Party and what it is about Kamala Harris that they find so offensive that they will vote for Donald Trump, and try to
I get
talk,
the assignment.
if you can, then the smugness, right, that person feels, right, from the judgment and the condemnation of people who can't comprehend what it is that they see at all, which doesn't help convince them
Right.
whatsoever. While you
Yeah.
think about that for a second, let me just add a little bit of additional framing by saying I think that this is one of the most mystifying elements and most absent from the conversation. If we lived in a country with 42 political parties, it's really not an important conversation to have. But given that we have two, and you look objectively at Trump, you see, but that team is beating the other team in the two-team league. And the people that are losing,
Yeah.
to the team that I think is fascistic and crazy, seem to have a real lack of awareness about what it is that half the country sees that makes them lean towards what I think is anathematic, as opposed to the side that holds itself out as Tim Wall said, they're the weirdo side, implying we're not. So just I would love to hear you just extemporize about that.
Yeah.
For those people who can't see.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Dallas, Texas. I have a lot of friends, a lot of family who will vote for Trump, who are Republican, and these are the types of conversations I actually choose to avoid them a lot of the time. But if we have them, this is stuff I hear. Go down the list. Abortion is a big one. Harris hasn't said there's any point where she supports limits on it. The cultural issues around sexuality and gender are really triggering to a lot of people. There are concerns that, well, and we can talk more about this, but Trump will end wars and pull us out of them, and we should put a pin on that. We've had enough. Saw what happened in Afghanistan. We've had enough of this. Harris will just kind of continue to enmesh us into global conflicts that lead to an even bigger one. There is, again, I think it's getting a little tired and not necessarily true, but there's a knee-jerk reaction that the Republican Party is better for economic growth and the economy and jobs. When you actually look at the platforms this time around, I think that's a hard case to make, but there's that. And then, Steve, I'm an Anglican. I'm in the Christian community. I think when you look at the support for Trump, especially among evangelicals, white evangelicals in particular, there is, because Trump talks at times their language and has a Bible embedded with the Constitution or whatever it is, God Bless America Bible, there is a belief that all of the bigger cultural forces that are kind of rooting against Christianity and evangelicals and traditional family values, whether that's marriage or sanctity of life, or whatever, that Trump will keep those at bay as long as he's president. And that they would look at the Harris agenda and say, there's not a single thing I agree with her on. And so on policy, I don't have anything in common with her. And this is where the confusion is. And this is, I think, the linch point of the whole thing. Even if you put policy aside and say, what if there's things that are bigger than policy? And that is, can we have a peaceful transfer of power? I think for reasons I don't understand, there remains incredible confusion around January 6th and around the fact that Trump still cannot concede that he lost that election. And so to me, that is hugely problematic. I think if you're still on Team Trump, you kind of look past that and say there's nothing in the Harris agenda. He's going to leave, he left office. What's the problem? Kind of get him back in there and stop these bigger cultural, social forces coming against me and what I believe to my deepest core. So I think that's the role. Man, I don't know. That's your department, Steve. I just talk policy and I have no idea. No, I mean, I'm not a gut person. I mean, the betting markets have Harris have a slight lead, but then the polls have been off the last two times and have underestimated the Republican showing. I don't know. I have no idea.
Let's say he loses. 11 o'clock, 11:30. I knew by midnight last time that Biden had it.
Yeah.
Let's say she wins. It's over by 11:30. Right? It's over election night. And he comes out and he makes his first allegation of fraud.
Yeah.
Now, again, right, we're back to the river's edge, right? Who's going to cross the river with him? Let me add to the scenario. Democrats take the House. Republicans take the Senate.
Likely scenario so far that you're laying out, right?
That's the likely scenario. Right. And he comes out and he says, fraudulent election.
Right.
One of two things happens. There's a deflation, or everyone follows him back across the river for another round, for another lap around the track. Do you think it's more likely that the elected officials of the party get behind Stop the Steal number 2? Or do you think that after the third election, he clearly loses people in the party who have, and I say this without judgment, though I do judge them, right? Have wound up where they are, that they say, now we're done. What do you think is the more likely of the two?
Neutral question, right, Steve? I don't, I think Trump has shown a remarkable ability to have the vast majority of the Republican Party line up behind him. And if he says the election was stolen, and there's a couple people who have random YouTube channels, not unlike this one or something, who are like, it was stolen. I saw so and hordes of people coming into this polling station. It didn't look whatever.
What's going to happen?
Well, I think you see political violence. I think you see a lot of confusion. I think you do have people lining up behind Trump, not just like 100 people, like millions and millions and millions who will believe that, as Trump has said, the election must indeed have been stolen because he's saying it, and the Democrats couldn't possibly stand that we would win. And I think you have months of riots, confusion. It's really kind of awful. I don't even want to project. I don't want to call it into being, Steve. I do.
If he loses, you have no doubt that he's going to strike the match. And he's going to say that this was stolen from me. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. I mean, he's made it perfectly clear. I see no scenario. And hold on. I just want to say, I get to say this from the prism of, I've actually placed a concession phone call for a defeated presidential candidate, right? He will not do it. He will not concede the election. He will not make the phone call. There will be no scenario where a team goes to him and says, you are going to fall short. There's no evidence of fraud. We can look at the precincts. We can extrapolate this forward. You will not be elected president because you will not accumulate 270 electoral votes. You're going to lose. I had the conversation with John McCain. So it's not an abstract pretend conversation. I've had this conversation with someone in my life. I placed the phone call to David Plouffe, who put Barack Obama on the phone. I talked to him and then handed the phone to John McCain. My point is, he will strike the match. You agree with that?
I like to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
Trump and the people around him. But I have not seen indications that he has people around him, like Pence last time, who will tell him the truth. And I have not seen any indication that he desires to lower the temperature in our country and the results. But I think what's bigger and what's broader than that, Stephen, why him denying the election, because if he should do so, becomes such a powerful thing, is because there is so much disorientation and confusion. And so many people will believe along with him because of stories that they've heard or seen online or social media, that indeed, like, it was, this is not just people pretending. That I think they'll actually believe.
I just want to dig deeper on this, because this first part is the speculative part, right? What he's going to do, right? You can't know. You can look at past actions as the prologue, but we don't know. I have an opinion on that. The second part of this, right, is an observational aspect, right? And so we got the match, and then we're looking at the wood pile. And what I said, is there any chance that that's wet wood? That Americans and that elected Republicans, when he touches the match to the wood, if he does it, that it just goes out. What you're saying, what I hear you saying, is that wood is dry. That wood is going to go up. If the match touches that wood, because of all of these factors you just went through, we're going to have a chaotic period.
I think that's right. And let me tell you a story about that. So on a social media Facebook group, right? A couple people posted, real people. I think I'd heard from some other people who might not have been real people, whatever. Infiltrate kind of this community social media group right down the road from me. and say that the Venezuela gangs are coming, and they're coming for little girls and their moms, and they're coming at this specific plaza, which has a bunch of dance companies, right? No reports of this in the Dallas Morning News, no police reports. It's totally made up, brings its way kind of into this ecosystem. And next thing you know, the dance studio has hardened security. The parking lot has hardened security. People aren't going to the Target because they're scared of the Venezuelan gangs. This happened last week in Dallas. And I'm saying this because it's something that's totally untrue that has been put into, in your case, kind of a kindling, and it lights. And all of a sudden, in real life, we're having police officers and people, again, responding to a threat that is not real. And I think, to me, it was so sad, even talking to the dance studio person, that like, no, we know this isn't real, but we have to do it because the parents want it to be, because they read this on social, it shows how this world of fantasy comes into real life and wreaks havoc on small businesses and real people and security. And that is such a small example because it was a completely baseless thing. But again, if a few people have stories of things they really saw happen and people go to, to vote, whatever, then I do think it's really problematic.
What do you say to the proposition that if you're like, let's say, a Ted Cruz who will call himself a conservative,
Yeah.
but
Hard
if
to
you
put
get in
myself in
line,
the mind of Ted Cruz, I would say.
if you get in line behind the utterly concocted, stolen election, which has as a consequence, right? So you're for installing the guy who lost against the will of the American people as the head of state, commander in chief, president of the world's oldest constitutional republic. I mean, when you think that through, doesn't he lose the right to call himself a conservative? Hasn't that word lost all meaning, right, for people who deny a result of an election? Because there's no way, if you ever had the experience, if you were with somebody on a rooftop and that person was getting ready to jump, right, and you're up there
Mario, Steve.
alone without training, I don't know what to say to the person other
Yeah.
than, if you jump, you will die. You will die, right? There's no scenario where you jump and live, just reality. And so there's no way, because this is the cornerstone of the country, right? We invented this way of life. I mean, we may take it for granted completely and utterly, but the idea that we pick the leaders, as opposed to the leaders either inheriting the people or capturing the people, is a relatively new concept in all of the story of human history, going all the way back. And I really like, so if you have a guy who gets in there, or a woman who gets in there, who wants to make the tax rate 75%, like, I understand, right?
Within normal bounds of policy, right? And
Right,
politics.
right. It sucks.
Right.
I wouldn't like it, but well, the country's going to endure. I don't, the society, the civilization.
Right.
If you were to look at this from a conservative frame, and I think I am a small C conservative still. I think Liz Cheney is. I think you are. But
Yeah.
If the society, do we have one? I think we do. There's an American society. Is there an American civilization that's unique, that's worth preserving against all of the currents of world history? I think that there is. And the cornerstone of it is government of the people, by the people, for the people. In the most sacred place in that chain, deeply connected to the concept of a rule of law, is a fidelity to an idea which holds you got to be able to be prepared to lose an election with
Yeah.
grace, or it all falls apart.
So I'm still stuck on role playing Ted Cruz. You really got me with that one, Steve. But I want to talk about conservatism and the Republican Party. There's a great book. It's called The Right, and it tracks the history of the GOP over the last 100 years. And what I took away from that book was that the isolationism, the protectionism, the nativism, all the stuff we're seeing right now in certain parts of the Republican Party are not new. They're in fact very old.
It's the default
But
setting.
it's the default setting. Okay. So if I'm center right or small conservative, whatever you are, that limited period I was born in the Reagan era was like, it was not the norm. It was an aberration of me. Okay. So I think the Republican Party, it changes. Hopefully it will change again. But again, even 100 years ago, it was within the bounds to what you're saying of policy differences, ones that I really disagree with. But it wasn't the peaceful transfer of power, and that being questioned was not on the table. And that's where I think there are just two different levels to the conversation. One is the policies, be it what the Republican Party 100 years used to support, which I disagree with, but what Harris is proposing now, which I disagree with. A lot of disagreements and nuance on the policy. But to the point that you're saying, the whole thing doesn't hold if we cannot trust the institutions and have a peaceful transfer of power.
Last thing that I think is one of the most underappreciated elements of this is that imagining a scenario where Trump does win.
Yeah.
We won't be living in the American Reich in 3 weeks, right? There's a lot of hyperbole about that. We live in the most sophisticated society in the history of human civilization with 94,000 elected entities of government, all of which have 3 lawyers working for them, right? So 4 years is 4 years is 4 years. I think there'll be a lot of damage that Trump is able to do. I think that a Republican Senate will repeal the filibuster within 48 hours. I think I think the judicial nominees and some of the people who get confirmed in that environment will be brutal and dangerous. But the one conversation that no one's had, right, like speculatively, is what happens to the Democratic Party if the Democratic Party loses this election to Trump. And I'm just waiting, right, for the first person 3 days after the election to be first to say, shut up, everybody. It's Kamala Harris's turn next time. She just didn't have enough time, right, to get it done this time. And so I think there's a real detachment from reality amongst a lot of Democrats that I see on TV about what happens in American politics if the Democratic Party fails to be able to stop MAGA. Because I think it may shatter American politics. I don't know why you don't then have a real independent candidate in an election in 2028 who runs against both parties.
I think the Democratic Party will have a choice to make. And I think there will be some in the party, if they lose the White House to Trump, who would say we need to be more progressive and more extreme, right? This is kind of the death spiral of both parties, reflecting a smaller and smaller and more energized constituency. Or they could make the choice to really be a big tent party. And, look, Harris has Cheney on the trail with her, Liz Cheney, like they're making nods, but I wouldn't say they're making that many nods to try to bring along half the country, which is still, other than the independents, which is still conservative and Republican, and try to make this an everybody in kind of show. I think they could have that moment if they lost to Trump. There certainly is a lot to think about what would happen if Trump won the election. And what would actually happen. And something we haven't even touched on is all that's happening in the rest of the world with China, with Russia, with Iran. Like, we're not doing this in kind of our own little bubble and experiment. What happens in the rest of the world impacts us too. And so what does that look like with Trump at the helm? I don't think we know.
We have 19 days to go for this monumental choice. Harris right now has to take it. She's in many ways the challenger in this race, and like a heavyweight boxing match, the challenger has to knock out the champ. You can't win it on the decision. And I think the country is demanding two things of Kamala Harris. They want to see her lay it out against Trump in clear, convincing language, speaking to the whole country, not a part of it. So this test is at hand for her about whether she can convince the country that she's ready to lead by dealing effectively in the context of a campaign with what she, rightly in my view, identifies as a very, very grave threat, which is Donald Trump to the future of the country. So it's on a razor's edge. It could go either way. Either way, there's going to be a fantastical amount of drama after the election is decided, and that's a departure, tragically, from the American tradition. But we will see it play out. Before I let you go, I did want to ask you about a book launch you have coming. Your husband, you're obviously the better half, Abby. That goes without saying, right?
Steve.
But we have book number 3 coming out. You want to
Number
talk
3.
about?
I love to. It's out.
That?
It's out in the States. It's out in Europe in the winter. It's called The Seventh Floor. I'm married to a former CIA officer. He writes 5 thrillers. This is the 3rd book. The first one's about Middle East. The second one's about Russia. And this one is a domestic thriller. If there's a Russian mole inside the 7th floor, which is like the C-suite of the CIA.
These are great books, great beach reads, great for the stocking, buy the books.
And subscribe to my podcast. What?
Right. Subscribe to Abby's podcast, Beyond the Talking Points. Read Abby McCloskey in the Dallas Morning News, one of the smartest, most principled and insightful people that I've gotten to work with over my career. I really appreciate the conversation. I think we're just at this monumental moment in the country, where this choice at hand is one where this time, after many, 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 many cycles of people saying this is the most important election ever, whatever this one yields, there will be consequences from it that real people will really feel. And if Donald Trump tries to do what he has made his singular promise, it will reorder American life. And we talked about it in different ways, but I really appreciate the conversation. It's not one that a lot of people are having.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Thank you, Abby. I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning, and I invite you to subscribe on our Substack, on our YouTube channel. Follow us. Welcome to the community.